Martha Vale had asked Hiram Voss for the use of 2 good men and a mule for 3 days. It was a plain request. She made it in the yard behind Voss's feed store on a gray morning in late October of 1886, when the first hard frost had silvered the horse troughs in Red Willow, Wyoming territory, and every breath hung white in the air before falling apart. Hiram stood beside a stack of oats sacks with his thumbs hooked beneath the straps of his overalls. He was a broad man with a red beard and a manner that gave every small kindness the shape of a favor. Behind him, a mule chewed at the edge of a loose board, patient as old stone. Martha did not ask for charity. She had money in a tin box beneath her floorboards. Not much, but enough to pay a fair wage. She had a widow's cabin on the north edge of town, 2 children under 10, and a wall that had begun to lean where the ground froze and swelled each year. She needed help digging behind that wall before winter shut the earth tight. 2 men, 1 mule, 3 days. Hiram listened with his head tipped to one side. Then he laughed, not in a mean way. That would have been easier to bear. He laughed with the complete absence of thought that sometimes passed for good humor among men who had never been made to measure the weight of a day alone. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "you need a carpenter, not a mule." "I need both. You put men and a mule on that north side now, they'll be working in mud to their knees. Better wait till spring and build right." "The wall will not wait till spring. It has stood this long." Martha looked past him at the worn boards of the store, at the long row of wagon wheels caked with dried earth, at the dark ridgeline west of town where the mountains had already taken on the pale, sharp color that came before a hard season. "It has been this long," she said. That was all. Hiram rubbed his beard and looked toward the street, where a freight wagon rattled past the store, and 2 boys chased each other through the dust. "I cannot spare men," he said. "Not for a cabin patch. Harvest is not all in. Folks have their own work. They can be paid. Money does not make more daylight." He said it as though that settled the matter. Then he turned back to his oat sacks. Martha stood there a moment longer, the cold pressing through the soles of her boots. The mule stopped chewing and looked at her with one dull brown eye. She had known about the refusal before. A widow learned it in small ways. A man who had promised to repair a roof failed to come. A merchant found a reason not to extend credit. A neighbor who once waved from a road began looking down at his reins when passing her gate. None of it was sharp enough to call cruelty. That was how it lasted. She thanked Hiram for his time and walked home along the frozen ruts, carrying in her pocket the list she had made the night before. 2 laborers, a mule, shovels, iron pins, stone if she could find it. By noon, the list had begun to change. Her cabin had been built by a man named Orson Pike 20 years earlier, back when Red Willow was little more than a trading post, a blacksmith's shed, and a burial ground behind the hill. It was a square little place of pine logs, set low against a slope where the wind came hard from the northwest. Orson had built it for summer work, then sold it before his first winter. The north wall had never been meant to face a Wyoming blizzard. Martha had learned that much during the winter after Samuel died. She had spent that first cold season keeping towels under the door, hanging quilts over the windows, and waking at night because the wind moved through the chinks in the logs with the thin, high whistle of something alive. Her daughter, Elsie, had been 6 then. Her son, Noah, had barely turned 4. They slept together beneath 3 blankets, their hair damp against their foreheads by morning from the breath trapped under the covers. Samuel had been gone 11 months. A wagon axle had slipped in a washed-out crossing south of Cheyenne. There had been no great last words, no long farewell. A man went out to earn flour and lamp oil, and the road took him. Martha had not spoken much about it after the first week. There was washing to do. There were beans to sort. There were children who woke hungry and could not be fed on grief. By the 3rd winter, she had begun to understand the cabin as one understood an animal with a bad leg. It could carry weight. It could move forward. But it needed watching. It needed help where it hurt. The north wall hurt the worst. The ground outside it rose toward a shallow ridge. Snow drifted there every winter until it climbed halfway up the logs. When the thaw came, meltwater found the cracks between the foundation stones and worked its way beneath the cabin. The wall leaned a little farther each year. Not enough for a passing man to see. Enough for Martha. She had planned to dig out the earth, brace the wall, and stack stone against it before the snow came. If Hiram gave her men and a mule, the work would take 3 days. Without them, she had no clear way to begin. That was the thing rejection cost her. Not pride. Time. The next morning, Martha went to the sawmill. Caleb Rusk owned it, though the word owned sat oddly on a place made of wet boards, screaming belts, and piles of sawdust that the wind carried across the road like pale smoke. Caleb was not unkind. He had given Martha a length of plank the year before when Noah had broken the back step. He was also a man who believed would solve every problem that had ever troubled the world. Martha found him near the cutting shed, checking the teeth on a saw blade with his thumb. "I need timber," she said. "Good timber. Not scrap. Enough to brace a wall and frame a narrow room." Caleb looked up. A room. Inside the north wall. He waited. "The children's sleeping place will be moved there for winter." His eyes went past her toward the road, then came back. "You mean build a room inside your cabin wall? A space between two walls. Why?" "Because it will hold heat." "Walls hold heat." "Some do." Caleb set the saw blade down. The metal made a dry ring against the bench. "If you put green pine in there, it will shrink. You put seasoned timber in there, it will cost more than you can spare. You build another wall, you lose room. You put your children against a north wall, you will freeze them better then. The weather can. They will not be against it. Then put them near the stove like every other sensible person." Martha had expected him to say no. She had not expected the small heat that rose into her face when he said sensible things. She took the coins from her pocket and laid them on the bench. "What will you buy?" Caleb did not touch the money. "It will buy scraps. Ends. Warped pieces. Nothing you should use to hold up a shelf, much less a cabin." "I need seasoned planks." "You need a new cabin." "I need what I asked for." Caleb let out a breath through his nose. He looked tired, perhaps because the mill had been behind on orders for weeks. Perhaps because a woman with a thin purse had come asking for timber at the edge of winter. Perhaps because people often mistook impatience for plain truth. "The good timber is spoken for," he said. "I cannot break every man's order because you have found a new fear." Martha gathered her coins. Outside, the saw began again. Its blade bit into a log with a hard, steady scream. She walked home by the river road instead of the main street. The river ran low and black between shelves of ice. Cottonwoods stood along its banks with their leaves gone, their branches clicking together in the wind. At the bend near the old freight corral, she found Silas Bender splitting stone. Most people in Red Willow did not speak to Silas unless they had no choice. He had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, though no one seemed certain which side he had fought on or whether he had fought at all. He lived in a dugout half a mile beyond town, took work when it was offered, and made things from stone that other men made from wood. His hands were thick and scarred. One ear had been cut nearly through and healed crooked. His left eye carried a pale gray film that made it look as though he were always watching whether no one else could see. A row of split stones lay beside him, each one clean-faced and square. Martha stopped at the fence. "Can stone hold a cabin wall?" Silas did not look up from his hammer. "Stone holds hills." "Can it hold a cabin wall?" "It can." "I need a wall braced before it snows." Now he looked at her. The wind moved a lock of white hair across his forehead. His face did not change, but he studied her in a way that made Martha feel he had already seen the leaning logs, the low ridge, the two children with their thin blankets. "You have men?" he asked. "No." "Mule?" "No." "Timber?" "No." Silas set down the hammer. "What do you have?" Martha looked toward town. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin blue threads. The church bell began to ring at noon, slow and hollow. "I have a cabin that will not stand another winter as it is." Silas nodded once. "That is more than some." He told her to bring a shovel, a wheelbarrow if she had one, and every flat stone she could find in the creek bed. He did not ask for payment. Martha did not offer it twice. A person learned when an offer became an insult. That afternoon, Silas came to her cabin and walked around it without speaking. Elsie watched from the doorway, with Noah behind her. The children had been told not to bother the man with the torn ear. They stared anyway. Silas crouched near the north wall. He pressed his palm against the lowest log, then put his cheek close to the crack beneath it. He scratched at the soil with a knife blade. He paced the line of the ridge. At last, he stood at the northwest corner and pointed. "Dig there. Outside the wall. 3 feet out." "Why?" "To give the earth somewhere to sleep." Martha looked at him. He pointed again. "Dig there. Deep as your knee." Keep the dirt. What will the dirt do? Ask less. Dig first. That was the first door. It was not a door made of boards. It was a door in the mind, and Martha stood before it with no clear notion of what waited on the other side. She had asked for men and a mule because that was the way work got done. Men dug. Mules hauled. Lumber braced. Every house in Red Willow had been raised by that kind of sense. Silas had offered her a shovel, a ditch, and a sentence that made no sense at all. She opened the door. For 6 days Martha dug. She woke before dawn, built the fire, boiled coffee until the smell filled the cabin, and set oats to soak in a pot near the coals. Elsie helped Noah dress. Noah gathered kindling from the woodbox. Martha walked outside while the sky was still purple behind the hills and put her shovel into the frozen ground. The top layer broke hard as brick. Below it, the dirt darkened and loosened. Each shovelful smelled of old roots and damp stone. It packed beneath her fingernails. It rubbed the skin of her palms raw beneath the cloth she had wrapped around them. Silas came every afternoon after his own work. He did not dig much. He watched the line of the trench, checked the slope with a string, and told Martha where to make it wider. Water goes where it is asked, he said. It has never asked for my leave before. It will listen to a ditch better than a prayer. He showed her how to stack creek stone without mortar, choosing pieces that leaned toward one another instead of merely sitting in a pile. A wall made of stone, he said, did not stand because each stone was strong. It stood because each stone had somewhere to press. Martha carried the smaller pieces. Silas moved the heavy ones with an iron bar and a lever made from a fallen cottonwood limb. They built a low retaining wall 3 feet beyond the cabin's north side, leaving a narrow trench between stone and logs. Then he asked for ashes. All of them, he said. Martha had been throwing ashes from the stove behind the shed since Samuel was alive. There were 2 winters worth beneath a crust of weeds and dirt. What for? Bring them. The ash was soft and pale, smelling faintly of old smoke. When Martha poured it into the trench, it drifted down between the stones like flour. Silas mixed it with dry earth and broken straw from the children's tick mattresses, then packed it against the outer side of the cabin wall. Over that, he laid more earth. Not wet soil, dry soil, taken from the upper bank and crumbled by hand. You are burying my house, Martha said. Only the part that needs it. It will rot the logs. Not if it can breathe. He left a narrow gap beneath the eaves and laid flat stones at an angle so rain and melt would run away from the wall. At the base, he shaped a small drain that led down toward the creek. Martha did not understand all of it. She understood the work. By the end of the 6th day, the north side of her cabin seemed to grow out of the hill itself. A low earth bank rose against it, held by stone. The logs no longer showed from ground to waist height. The wind struck the slope and slid upward. Silas stood back with his hands on his hips. Now your wall has a coat, he said. It looks like a grave mound. It looks like earth. The children had been listening from the doorway. Will the cabin be warm now? Noah asked. Silas looked at the boy, then at the narrow space between the stone wall and the buried logs. Warmer than it was. That night, Martha put her hand against the inside of the north wall. It was still cold, but the cold did not bite. It waited. 3 days later, Martha went to see Dr. Amos Wren. He was the closest thing Red Willow had to a man of learning. He had a narrow office beside the church, shelves of bottles behind his desk, and a habit of looking over his spectacles before answering a question, as if truth were something that needed to be measured against the person asking. Martha did not go for medicine. She went for knowledge. Dr. Wren had come west with 2 crates of books and a reputation from St. Louis that had thinned over the years, but never entirely vanished. People said he could set a bone, deliver a baby, pull a tooth, and read Latin. In a place like Red Willow, those gifts made him important. She found him writing a letter near the stove. I need to know about air, she said. He looked up. Most people do. I need to know how to keep it still. His spectacles lowered a little. Still. Between walls. The doctor folded his hands. You are speaking of insulation. I suppose. What are you building? A sleeping space for the children. Inside the cabin. Along the north wall. He sat back in his chair. Martha, you have already buried half the outside of that cabin, according to what I hear. Not half. Enough. Silas Bender said. Silas Bender has spent 20 years living underground. That does not make him an architect. He said still air holds warmth. In a manner of speaking. Can I make it hold more? Dr. Wren looked at the dark window behind her. The first fine snow of the year had begun to touch the glass, small flakes that vanished almost at once. You have children to consider, he said. You should not be experimenting with them. I am considering them. Build a proper room in spring. Until then, keep them by the stove. Use quilts. Keep the chimney clear. Do what every family has done since the first cabin went up. Every family has not had this wall. No, he said, but every family has had winter. The room grew quiet except for the tick of a stove. Martha looked at the books on his shelves. One was large and brown, its spine cracked from use. Another had a blue cloth cover faded nearly gray. On the desk lay a pamphlet with diagrams of grain bins and cellar doors. You have books on houses, she said. I have books on many things. May I borrow one? Dr. Wren's expression changed, not much, but enough. No, it was not a cruel refusal. He had reasons. Books were costly. Pages tore. Ink ran. A widow with children might spill coffee on them or leave them near a stove. Still, the answer was no. Martha stood. I will return your time, she said. You need not. I will. At the door, he spoke again. Martha. She turned. Do not confuse hardship with wisdom. There is no virtue in making a hard life stranger than it already is. She nodded once and left. Outside, the snow had begun to gather on the porch rail. It made almost no sound when it fell. That was what people forgot about the first snow. It arrived without force. It came down soft as ash. The force came later, when enough small things lay together. Martha walked to the churchyard and stood beneath the bare cottonwoods, thinking of Dr. Wren's words. There was no virtue in making a hard life stranger. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps Hiram had been right. Perhaps Caleb had been right. Perhaps she had spent 9 days digging a ditch because she had been too proud to admit she could not afford the proper way. The thought sat heavy in her chest. Then she looked toward her cabin, low against the hill. The earth bank had darkened with snow. Smoke rose from the chimney. Behind the small front window, Elsie's face appeared, then vanished. Martha went home. That was her answer. She did not have a carpenter. She did not have seasoned lumber. She did not have a doctor's book. She had a cabin, an unfinished wall, 2 children, and winter coming from the northwest. The next morning, she began to build inside. She took down the old shelf along the north wall and moved the flour barrel to the south side of the cabin. She measured a space 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, enough for a narrow bed, a low chest, and 2 children curled close beneath blankets. She had no proper planks. Caleb had seen to that. What she had were old wagon boards from the shed, 2 doors removed from the chicken coop, a length of warped pine that Samuel had once meant to turn into a fence rail, and 6 rough slabs from the roof of an abandoned lean-to near the creek. The boards did not match. Neither did the nails. She made them fit. Silas came after sunset and stood in the middle of the cabin while Martha showed him the frame she had started. The children sat near the stove, watching with solemn faces. You leave a hand's width here, he said, pointing between the old north wall and the new inner frame. Only a hand. 2 hands where you can. That wastes space. Still air needs a place to sit. He helped her set the first upright posts. They were not straight timber. One bowed inward. Another had a knot the size of a fist. He turned each flaw toward the room where it would carry less strain. Wood lies, he said. Look at what it wants to do. Martha looked. She began to see. A board had a bend before it had a purpose. A stone had a flat face before it had a place. A wall could press inward if another wall pressed back. A small gap could be more useful than a thick plank if the gap held air that did not move. The knowledge had not come from the doctor's books. It had come through a closed door. By the time the first week of November passed, the cabin had changed. The new wall stood inside the old one, rough and narrow, leaving a dead air space between. Martha packed dry chaff into cloth sacks and set them along the lower edge where the cold crept up from the floor. She stitched old flour sacks into a hanging curtain for the entrance to the children's space. She rubbed the hinges of the little inner door with tallow so they would not squeal in the cold. She lined the low bed with straw, then quilts, then 2 wool blankets bought from a passing trader with the last of Samuel's silver buttons sewn into their hem. She did not tell anyone in town what she was doing. The town knew anyway. There were no secrets in a place where smoke, laundry, and need were visible from the road. At the well, two women stopped speaking when Martha approached. At the store, Hiram asked if she had finished making a cellar in the side of her house. Caleb Rusk passed her gate one afternoon and slowed his wagon long enough to look at the earth-banked wall. "Be careful you do not bury the chimney next," he called. Martha kept splitting kindling. She had no answer for men who had given none. Then one evening, while she was carrying a bucket from the shed, she heard the sound of a door closing where no door should have been. It came from the north wall. Not the front door. Not the inner door. Not the shed. A deep, dull thud from behind the packed earth and stone. Martha set down the bucket. The children were inside, eating beans at the table. The stove gave off its low iron tick. Outside, the sky had gone green-gray over the ridge. She stood with one hand against the cabin wall. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. The sound did not come again. She did not know whether the stone had settled, whether the earth bank had shifted, or whether the wall itself had begun to give way beneath all that weight. For a long moment, she stood between the old wall and the children. Then she picked up the bucket and went inside. 2 days later, Silas came with a book. It was not one of Dr. Wren's books. It was a thin, battered volume with no cover, its pages stained brown at the corners. He had found it years earlier in a mining camp near Laramie, he said, beneath a bunk where a man had died with a fever. The book was about farm buildings. Not houses. Farm buildings. It had drawings of grain stores, smokehouses, root cellars, and stone sheds built into hillsides. The words were small and close together. Silas read slowly, moving his finger beneath each line. "There," he said. Martha leaned over his shoulder. The passage described a double wall around a winter storehouse. It spoke of dry fill and air gap, and a vent near the top to keep damp from gathering. It warned against sealing every crack. "Why?" Martha asked. "Because damp kills warmth," Silas said. "Wet cold is worse than plain cold." The book called it ventilation. Silas called it letting a house breathe. Martha saw the small vent near the roof of the inner wall that he had told her to leave. She had nearly stuffed it with rags the night before, certain it would leak heat. She had even cut a rag to fit. It lay on the table beside the lamp. She picked it up, then folded it, and put away. That was another door. A door she had almost shut because she did not understand what lay beyond it. The cold deepened. By the middle of November, the river froze hard enough for boys to cross near the shallows. The sky took on that high, polished look that old settlers watched with unease. Horses grew restless in their traces. The dogs in town slept close to doors and woke barking at empty roads. Red Willow had known bad winters before. Everyone said so. They said it in the feed store. They said it in the churchyard. They said it while buying flour and lamp oil and salt pork. "We have seen worse." That sentence had a way of making men careless. Martha bought dried beans, cornmeal, salt, coffee, and 2 sacks of potatoes. She stored them under the children's bed space, where the new inner wall kept the air steady. She hung onions in an old net near the stove. She packed apples in chaff inside a wooden box, remembering a line from Silas's torn book. Fruit froze first where air moved around it. She filled every water bucket in the cabin. She wrapped the pump handle outside with burlap. She cut wood until her shoulders burned beneath her dress. Hiram Voss watched her load split logs into her wheelbarrow one afternoon and shook his head. "You are working like a woman expects the Lord to lose track of her address," he said. Martha kept walking. That night, Elsie asked why they had to sleep inside the new little room. "Because it will be warmer," Martha said. "Will the snow get in?" "No." "Will the wall fall down?" Martha looked at the rough boards, the curtain, the small iron latch Silas had fitted into the inner door. "No," she said. She hoped she had not lied. The blizzard came before dawn on the first day of December. It did not arrive with thunder or a black sky. It came as a change in the sound around the cabin. The wind had been moving all night, but near 4 in the morning it found a new voice. It came down from the ridge in a long, low roar and struck the earth bank on the north side. The cabin shuddered. Martha woke at once. The stove had burned down to coals. The room was dark except for the faint red eye behind the iron grate. Frost had flowered across the window glass. From the children's space came the slow, even breathing of 2 small bodies asleep beneath quilts. She rose, fed wood into the stove, and went to the front door. It would not open. Snow had piled against it overnight. She put her shoulder to the boards. The door moved an inch, then stopped. Cold air pushed through the crack and struck her face with the smell of ice and bare earth. Behind her, Noah began to cry. "Mama! I am here." The wind hit the cabin again. This time, something gave way outside with a crack, like a rifle shot. Martha did not go to the door. She went to the north wall. The earth bank held. The stones held. But above them, near the eaves, she heard a scrape and a settling sound. Snow was building against the roof. The storm had come from a northwest, just as she had feared, and the low ridge had funneled it toward the cabin. She checked the vent above the children's inner wall. It was clear. She checked the stovepipe. It drew smoke. Cleanly upward. She checked the water buckets. The top of one had already begun to crust with ice. Outside, the red willow was disappearing beneath the snow. Inside, Martha lit the lamp. The first day of work passed. There was no room for fear, while work remained. She kept the fire low and steady instead of feeding it too hard. A hot stove burned wood fast, and she did not know how long the storm would last. She melted snow in an iron pot only after letting it settle beneath a little water, because snow alone scorched and wasted heat. She gave the children oats with milk from a tin, then beans at noon, then a thin broth at night. She made them stay inside the narrow sleeping space when the wind rose hardest. The dead air behind the inner wall did its quiet work. The boards nearest the children's bed were cool to the touch, but no longer rimed with frost. The straw beneath their blankets stayed dry. Their breath did not hang as thick in the small room as it did near the front door. The cabin was not warm. It was survivable. Near evening, Martha heard the first sound from town. A bell. Not the church bell rang for service. Not the noon bell. A wild, uneven clanging carried on the wind, then vanished. She stood with the ladle in her hand. The bell rang again. 3 times. Then nothing. Elsie looked up from the table. "What is that?" Martha listened. "Is the wind catching something?" she said. But she knew better. The church bell had been struck by someone. A signal. Or a warning. The sound came through the storm from behind a door she could not open, from a town she could not reach. She stood there for a long time, listening to it again. It did not come. On the second day, the chimney began to draw poorly. Martha noticed it first in the smell. Smoke, thin but bitter, gathered near the ceiling. It clung to the wool curtains and caught in her throat. She opened the stove damper, then closed it. She checked the pipe joints. She tapped the iron with the poker. The wind had packed snow against the outside of the chimney, where it rose above the roof. She could not reach it. The front door was still blocked. The rear window had vanished behind drifted snow. The cabin's small crawl hatch beneath the floor had frozen shut. For the first time since the storm began, Martha sat down. Her hands lay in her lap. The children watched her from inside their narrow room, quiet now. The stove gave a weak orange light. If the chimney stopped, the fire stopped. If the fire stopped, the cabin would not last. She looked toward the inner wall. There was still the vent. A small opening near the roof, made to keep the dead air space dry. Silas had told her not to block it. She could open it wider. Let smoke into the space between walls. It might pull upward toward the eaves. It might give the chimney another path for air. It might also fill the hidden room with smoke, trap heat where she needed it, or turn the wall into a box of poison. Martha stood before the little wooden cover. Her hand reached for the latch. She stopped. The door was no bigger than her palm. One turn would open it. She remembered the book's stained page. She remembered Silas's finger beneath the words. She remembered the doctor saying she was experimenting with her children. She could not know which man had been right. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin with the full weight of a mountain behind it. Inside, Noah coughed. Martha opened the vent only half an inch. Then she took the poker and cleared the ash from beneath the stove grate. She fed the fire with thin, dry kindling instead of thick logs. She opened the front damper for 3 breaths, then shut it. She waited. The smoke thickened. Then, little by little, it lifted. A thread of it found the pipe. The stove began to draw again. Not well. Enough. That small mistake cost her half a bucket of kindling and an hour of heat. She had burned too much too fast in her fear. By nightfall, the woodpile inside looked smaller than it should have. Martha counted the remaining logs. Then she counted them again. On the 3rd day, the storm did not ease. Snow had covered the lower half of the front window. The light that came through it was blue and dim, as if the world outside had gone underwater. Martha scraped frost from the glass with the edge of a spoon and saw nothing but white. No fence. No road. No town. The children had stopped asking when they could go out. That frightened her more than their questions had. She gave them small jobs. Elsie sorted beans. Noah turned the coffee grinder, though there was little coffee left. They folded cloth strips for the lamp wick. They listened while Martha told them about the creek in summer, about minnows beneath flat stones, about wildflowers that pushed up through the grass after the rains. She did not tell them about the bell. She did not tell them that the roof had groaned twice during the night. On the fourth day, she heard voices on the porch. At first, she thought the wind had changed shape again. Then came a knock. 3 blows against the buried front door. Martha froze. The children looked at her. Another knock. Who could be outside in that storm? No one should have been walking. No one could have found the cabin with the road gone and the fences covered. It might have been someone from town. It might have been a traveler. It might have been a man half-frozen and desperate enough to claw through snow. It might have been nothing but timber shifting beneath the drift. Then a voice came through the door. Martha. She knew it. Hiram Voss. The name moved through the cabin like a draft. She stood before the front door with her hand on the latch. On the other side were the same voices that had laughed in Hiram's yard. The same town that had found men for harvest and lumber for sheds and advice for every trouble except hers. The stove burned low behind her. The children's hidden room held 2 beds, not 6. The food beneath it had been laid in for 3 people. Martha's fingers rested on the iron latch. She had prepared for the cold. She had prepared for hunger. She had prepared for the long silence of storm. She had not prepared for the town coming to her door. Martha, Hiram called again. His voice was rough now, smaller than it had been in the feed store. Open if you can. She did not open the door at once. She went to the stove. She put another log on the coals. She took the pot from the hook and added water, beans, and the last heel of salt pork. Then she lifted the latch. The door opened inward only a few inches. Snow forced itself through the gap in a white rush. Martha had to push with both hands while Hiram shoveled from outside. Together, without speaking, they made enough space for a body to enter. Hiram came first. His beard was stiff with ice. His eyebrows were white. Behind him stood Caleb Rusk, bent nearly double beneath a blanket. With them were Caleb's wife, Ruth, and their 2 boys, one of whom had blood frozen beneath his nose. They looked smaller than Martha had ever seen them. The storm had taken something from all of them. Hiram shut the door behind the last boy. Snow fell from their clothes onto the floorboards. The cabin filled at once with the smell of wet wool, cold leather, and men who had walked too far through bad weather. No one spoke. Martha looked at them. Then she looked at the narrow door to the children's room. Elsie and Noah stood behind it, watching through the curtain. Hiram followed her eyes. His mouth moved before the sound came. We had to leave the house, he said. Ruth went to the feed store. My place, he swallowed. My place is open to the wind. Caleb's wife held her youngest boy close. His lips were pale. The mill shed fell, Caleb said. The house wall split where the chimney runs. We thought we could make it to the church, but, he looked down, could not find it. Martha had seen Caleb's hands around a saw blade. Strong hands. Certain hands. Now they shook. She did not ask why they had not made better roofs. She did not ask where their neighbors were. She did not remind Hiram that money did not make more daylight. She moved aside from the stove. Take off the wet things, she said. Hang them there. It was not forgiveness. It was work. They moved through the cabin with the awkward care of people entering a place they had once judged from the road. Caleb took off his coat and stared at the inner wall. Hiram ran one bare hand over the rough boards, then looked toward the earth-banked north side as if he could see through it. What is this? He asked. A wall, Martha said. He nodded. No one laughed. That night, 8 people slept inside the cabin built for 3. The children stayed in the hidden room, their bed pushed against the inner wall. Ruth and the younger boys lay on blankets near the stove. Hiram and Caleb sat up in turns, feeding the fire small pieces of wood and listening to the roof. Martha did not sleep. She measured each sound. The chimney's draw, the wind against the earth bank, the soft scrape of snow sliding across the roof, the breathing of strangers who had once been neighbors in the easy sense and were now only people trying not to die. At dawn, Hiram found the outer wall warm enough to rest his hand against. Stone outside, he asked. Yes. Earth too? Yes. He looked at the floor, then at the inner wall. Why? Martha did not answer. She had no wish to explain the path that had brought her here. It was too long. It began with a refusal in a feed store and passed through a sawmill, a dugout, a borrowed book, a doctor's closed shelf, a ditch full of ash, and the hands of a man Red Willow barely greeted. There was no short answer. On the 5th day, more knocking came. This time it was not Hiram. It was Dr. Amos Wren. He stood outside with a young woman named Lydia Hart and her mother, both wrapped in quilts stiff with snow. Dr. Wren's spectacles were gone. His face had been cut by ice along one cheek. He carried a small leather bag in one hand and a dead lantern in the other. Martha opened the door after hearing his voice. He entered without looking at her. His first concern was Lydia's mother, whose feet had gone pale and hard inside her boots. He checked the old woman's pulse, rubbed her hands, and gave quiet instructions to Ruth. Then he looked around the cabin. His gaze found the hidden room, the inner wall, the vent near the roof, the chaff sacks along the floor. The earth bank pressed against the old logs beyond the window. He stood very still. "You left a breathing gap," he said. "Yes." "Between the walls?" "Yes." "Dry fill beneath?" "Yes." He nodded once. There was something close to shame in his face. Not the loud shame of a man caught doing wrong. The quieter kind. The kind that came when a person discovered that his certainty had been a poor shelter. "I had a book," he said. Martha looked at him. "The one you asked for. There was a section on cold storage. I had not read it in years." Outside, the storm tore at the roof. Inside, Dr. Wren lowered his eyes. Martha gave him a bowl of beans. He ate without another word. By the 6th day, the cabin became a small country of its own. There were rules now, though Martha never called them rules. Wet clothes went near the stove, never over it. Snow was melted in the large pot, then poured into buckets before it could freeze again. The children's room remained for children and the old woman, whose feet needed the steadiest warmth. Every person ate small portions at set times. No one opened the front door unless 2 others held blankets ready to block the wind. Caleb Rusk used his sawmill hands to brace a roof beam with the last long plank in Martha's shed. Hiram shoveled snow away from the chimney whenever the wind dropped enough for him to crawl through the narrow gap at the front door. Dr. Wren tended frostbitten fingers and a cough that settled in Lydia Hart's chest. Martha kept count of food. That was the hardest work. 1 sack of beans became half a sack. Potatoes softened. Coffee went first to the old woman, then to the doctor, then to no one. The salt pork dwindled to a strip no longer than her hand. Flour became a dark thought beneath the children's bed. There were 11 mouths now. The storm showed no sign of ending. On the 7th morning, a sound came from beneath the floor. A low scrape, then another. Martha was kneeling by the stove when she heard it. The others did not. They were asleep or pretending to be. The wind had kept them awake for too many nights. The sound came again, not from outside, from below. The cabin had a shallow crawl space beneath its floor, no more than a foot of air between the boards and the cold ground. Martha had stored nothing there. The hatch was frozen, shut. Snow covered the outside steps. She put her ear to the floor. A scrape, a pause, then a dull knock. The earth under the cabin had shifted, or a piece of the old foundation stone had broken loose, or water, trapped beneath the drift, had found a way to run where it should not. Martha thought of the weight now pressed against the north wall. Earth, stone, snow, the whole winter there. She did not wake the others. She went to the children's room and looked at Elsie and Noah asleep beneath the blankets. Their cheeks had color. Their hair smelled of wool and wood smoke. Then she opened the small storage panel at the base of the inner wall. Behind it lay the dead air space, packed at the bottom with chaff sacks and dry straw. If she pulled the sacks free, she could reach farther toward the floor and perhaps inspect the old log sill. She could make room for Caleb to crawl behind the wall. She could find out what was moving beneath the cabin. She could also spill the insulation that had kept the children warm for 7 days. Her hand rested on the first sack. One pull, and the chaff would come loose. The space would open. The cold would have a road. Martha thought of how often she had nearly chosen the simple thing because it could be seen. The timber Caleb had offered. The stove, heat Dr. Wren trusted. The men and mule Hiram said made work real. Simple things had their place, but not every place. She shut the panel. The sound beneath the floor came once more, then went quiet. She would not tear open the wall to answer every fear. That was another door left closed. On the 8th day, the storm broke for less than an hour. The sky appeared above the ridge, pale and hard as tin. Wind dropped to a low rush. Hiram crawled outside to clear the chimney, while Caleb and Martha dug at the rear window with a coal shovel. When the snow fell away from a glass, Martha saw red willow, or what remained of it. The church steeple had lost its top. The feed store roof sagged inward over Hiram's yard. Smoke rose from only 3 chimneys in the whole town. One house near the well had a wall missing. Its rooms were open to the snow. No one spoke. The conventional cabins had been built alike. Pine walls, shallow foundations, roofs steep enough for rain, but not for drifts. Food stored in sheds and cellars that froze when wind found the cracks. They had been sensible houses. The storm had not cared. Martha looked at her own cabin, half buried in earth, ugly from the road, cramped inside, made from warped boards and old straw, and a stone wall built by a man everyone avoided. She felt no triumph, only a deeper fear. Her shelter had held for the people inside it. Could it hold for more? The question had teeth. Before she could answer it, the wind rose again. The brief patch of sky vanished. Snow came sideways across the window. Hiram barely made it back through the front door before the drift closed over his boots. That night, Lydia Hart's cough worsened. Dr. Wren listened to her chest with his ear pressed near her ribs. He gave her a spoon of medicine from his bag, then sat beside the stove with both hands around an empty cup. "We need broth," he said. Martha knew. The last salt pork had gone into the pot that morning. There were beans, potatoes, flour, and a jar of dried sage. No meat, no milk, no coffee. Caleb looked toward the children's room. "We can eat less," he said. "We are already eating less," Martha replied. Hiram stared at the floorboards. For the first time since he entered the cabin, he looked directly at her. "I had stores," he said, "at the feed place. Corn, oats, a side of pork." Martha said nothing. "I thought I could keep the roof clear. The snow was too deep. I had boys helping. Men." His hand tightened around his cup. "2 good men and a mule, as it happens." The cabin grew quiet. Hiram looked up at the rough inner wall. "I should have sent them." Martha turned the potatoes in the pot. There were many things she could have said. Each had waited for her through long days of digging, through bleeding hands, through the sound of laughter outside the feed store. None of them would make broth. "Tomorrow," she said, "if the wind drops, we will see what can be reached." Hiram nodded. It was enough for that hour. On the 9th day, a boy named Peter Sloane came to the door alone. He was 14, perhaps 15, and covered in so much snow that Martha first took him for part of the drift. Hiram heard him scratching at the front boards. Not knocking, scratching. They opened the door and pulled him inside. Peter's father had been one of the men who worked for Hiram. He had helped clear the feed store roof before it fell. Peter had been sent to find help after his father was hurt. "How far?" Dr. Wren asked. Peter tried to answer, but his teeth would not stop shaking. Martha gave him warm water, with a spoon of molasses in it. After a while he spoke. His father was in the old livery stable near town. 3 men were there. Maybe 4. The stable had stone walls on one side but a bad roof. They had food for a day, perhaps less. They could not move the injured man. Hiram stood. "We go." The doctor looked at him. "In this. We know where it is. Knowing where it is does not mean you can reach it." Martha looked toward the front door. Snow pressed against it up to the latch. The wind had dropped some, but the sky remained a white wall. There was another way. Behind the cabin, beneath the earth bank, Silas had insisted on a narrow drainage trench leading downhill toward the creek. It had been dug to carry meltwater away in spring. The storm had covered its mouth, but beneath the snow the shallow line still made a low path along the side of the ridge. Martha had walked it twice before snow came. It did not lead directly to town. It led past the creek, through the cottonwoods, and toward the back of the livery stable. She could show them. But taking men out meant losing heat each time the door opened. It meant risk. It meant leaving the cabin, and its food and children in the hands of people who had not built it. It meant trusting the same strangers who had come to her only when their own places failed. Martha stood between the stove and the door. That was the hardest door of all. One side held what she had saved. The other held people who might die. She did not need to decide whether they deserved help. That question was too small. She needed to decide whether the shelter could become more than a hiding place. "Caleb," she said, "take the coal shovel. Hiram, take the rope from the shed. Tie it from the back post to your waist. Do not leave the line." They looked at her. "The drainage cut runs toward the creek," she said. "Follow the low ground. The snow is less deep there." Hiram nodded. "Will it hold?" "The path." "The cabin." Martha looked at the children's room. "It has held this long." That morning, Hiram and Caleb left by the rear window. They crawled through the opening one at a time, tied to the rope. Martha and Dr. Wren paid out the line from inside the cabin until it went taut, then slack, then taut again. The wind swallowed them. For 2 hours, no one spoke much. Elsie sat beside Noah in the hidden room, holding his hand. Ruth whispered a prayer, without sound. Peter slept near the stove with his boots off, his feet wrapped in strips of cloth. Martha held the rope. It ran through her hands, rough and cold. At one point, it jerked hard enough to pull her forward. She braced her feet against the floorboards and waited. Nothing. Then, far away, she heard something beneath the wind. A door. Not her door. A door banging loose somewhere in the storm. The sound came once, twice, then vanished. Martha did not know whether it meant Hiram and Caleb had reached the stable, whether someone had found them, or whether another house in Red Willow had opened itself to the weather. She held the rope until her hands ached. At last it moved again. 2 pulls. Then 1. Hiram had made up the signal as they left. 2 pulls meant they had reached shelter. 1 meant they were returning. Martha waited. The line began to come back. Slowly. By late afternoon, Caleb crawled through the rear, opening first. His face was gray. Hiram came behind him. Between them, dragged on a makeshift sled of old boards, lay Peter's father, Ezra Sloan, his leg bound with splints. 2 more men followed on the rope. They brought no food. They brought only the cold with them. The cabin held 15 people that night. It should not have been possible. Martha knew that. Yet people folded into spaces when cold gave them no choice. Children slept in pairs. Men sat against walls with blankets over their shoulders. The injured lay nearest the stove. The hidden room became a place for breath and warmth, its small inner door opening and closing like the heart of the cabin. The wall did not fail. The dead air space kept the north side from freezing solid. The earth bank took the worst of the wind. The stone trench drained meltwater whenever the temperature rose enough for snow to soften. The high vent kept damp from turning the narrow room sour and wet. None of it was grand. None of it looked like the way things were supposed to be done. It was held anyway. On the 10th day, Silas Bender came through the rear opening. No one had expected him. He arrived alone, carrying a sack over one shoulder and a shovel in the other hand. His coat was torn at the elbow. Ice hung from his white hair. He stepped inside, looked at the packed cabin, and said only, "You have company." Martha stared at him. "Where were you?" "Dug out." "It held." "Mostly." "What is in the sack?" "Turnips." For the first time in 10 days, Martha laughed. It was not a large sound. It surprised her when it came. The others looked at her, then at Silas, and Hiram gave a tired breath that almost became laughter too. Silas set the turnips on the table and walked to the north wall. He placed his palm against the boards. "Warm," he said. Martha nodded. "The floor shifted," she told him. "Where?" She showed him the place where she had heard the scrape beneath the cabin. Silas knelt, listened, and tapped the boards with his knuckles. "Drain stone moved," he said. "Not wall." "You are sure?" "No." Martha looked at him. He met her eyes with his clouded one. "But I would sleep here." That was enough. Silas used the shovel handle to test the floor. He found a spot near the south edge where the boards had flexed. With Caleb's help, he set a short stone pier beneath it through the crawl hatch after they cleared snow from the outside. The work took an hour. The cold that entered during it took 2 more to drive away. Still, the cabin held. That evening, as turnip stew boiled over the stove, Dr. Wren sat beside Martha at the table. Everyone else slept or lay quiet. The lamp flame wavered in its glass chimney. The cabin smelled of sage, wet wool, and boiled earth. "I was wrong," the doctor said. Martha kept cutting turnips. "You were not wrong about all things." "No," he looked toward the inner wall. "Only the thing that mattered most." Martha did not answer. Dr. Wren watched the children through the small doorway. Noah had one hand curled around Elsie's sleeve in sleep. "I thought safety meant doing what had been done before," he said. "There is comfort in that thought." "There is. But comfort is not always shelter." "No." He nodded. After a while, he said, "Your husband taught you this?" Martha's knife stopped. Samuel had not taught her. Not this. He had been a good man, but he had believed wood muscle and steady wages could mend most things. He would have asked Hiram for men. He would have bought lumber from Caleb. He would have trusted Dr. Wren's books more than Silas's hands. Martha had learned because no one came. No, she said. Winter did. The doctor lowered his eyes. He did not ask another question. On the 11th morning, the wind stopped. No one noticed at first. The cabin had been loud for so long that silence seemed like another kind of danger. Martha woke before dawn and sat up in the dark. The stove had gone low. Someone snored near the door. A child shifted beneath a blanket. But the wind was gone. She crossed the room and placed her hand against the window. No snow struck the glass. She scraped a clear place with a spoon. Outside, the world lay still. Snow had covered the road, the fences, the creek bank, and the roofs. It lay smooth across the valley beneath a pale morning sky. Smoke rose from distant chimneys in straight columns. 1, 2, 3, then more. Red Willow had not vanished. It had endured. By noon, people began to emerge. They came slowly at first, walking atop drifts with shovels and poles. Some wore blankets over their coats. Some carried children. Some pulled sleds with food, tools, or old people wrapped in quilts. They came toward Martha Vale's cabin because its chimney smoked. They came because word had passed through whatever houses had held. They came because the low earth-bank wall had done what the tall, sensible walls had not. Martha stood in the doorway with her children behind her and watched them approach. There was no pride in it. There was too much work ahead. The storm had taken roofs, sheds, fences, livestock, stores, and sleep. It had taken some people too, though no one said how many yet. Red Willow would spend months digging out, patching walls, sharing food, and learning the names of losses that could not be repaired. Hiram stood beside Martha on the porch. He had shaved the ice from his beard, but he looked older than he had 11 days before. Caleb Rusk came down from the roof where he had been checking the chimney. His hands rested on the rough boards of the new inner wall. Silas sat near the stove, eating a turnip from a bowl. Dr. Wren was already tending to a woman who had fallen in the snow near the road. The people arriving looked at the cabin, at the stone, at the earth packed against the north side, at the strange narrow space built within the old walls. A place they had mocked, a place they now needed. Hiram turned to Martha. His voice was low enough that only she heard it. "You asked for help," he said. "Yes. I thought your way was foolish." Martha looked over the snow toward the feed store, where half the roof lay buried in a drift. "I know." He nodded once. Then he looked at the cabin wall again. "You built better than what we refused you." Martha did not say anything. There was nothing to add. People needed beds. They needed dry socks. They needed soup. They needed places to store food before the next cold night. They needed hands to clear chimneys and shore up roofs. They needed to learn where water ran beneath snow and how air could sit still between two walls. The work had only changed shape. By spring, the earth around Martha's cabin had thawed. The stone wall held firm. The drain carried meltwater toward the creek. The north logs were dry beneath the eaves. The inner room smelled of straw, pine, and children. Elsie and Noah slept there until the weather warmed, though they no longer needed to. They liked the smallness of it. They liked the curtain. They liked the way their mother sat beside the stove where she could see them through the open little door. Hiram Voss sent 2 men and a mule in April. They came without being asked. Caleb Rusk brought seasoned planks from the mill and stood them against the shed. Dr. Wren carried over 3 books, including the brown volume Martha had once asked to borrow. Silas Bender came last, walking up the road with his shovel over his shoulder. Together, they built earth banks against 6 cabins on the north edge of Red Willow. Then they built 8 more. No one called them grave mounds. No one laughed at the ash, the chaff, the breathing gaps, or the stone set beneath the earth. Men who had once trusted only tall boards and steep roofs began asking Martha where the snow drifted on their land. Women saved dry straw through summer. Children carried flat creek stones in their aprons. The town did not become wiser all at once. Towns never did. But when the next cold season came, smoke rose from lower, quieter cabins. The wind still crossed the valley. Snow still gathered along the ridges. Winter remained what it had always been, a hard teacher with no need to raise its voice. Martha Vale kept the hidden room. She did not tear it down when spring came. She filled the dead air space again before autumn. She stored beans beneath the bed, apples in chaff, and kindling in a dry box near the stove. She checked the chimney. She cleared the drain. She kept the small vent open. Each year, someone in town asked why she held on to such an odd little room. Martha never gave much answer. The wall had held. That was enough. Every door closed against a person in need can become the wall they build stronger than the one behind it. If this story stayed with you, another winter is waiting beyond the next ridge.